Welcome to Richard and Greg, a channel dedicated to discussion, debate and argument on a whole array of topics. Today, Greg and I discuss the UK government's lockdown of its people. Plus, we also discuss how China may have understated their death figures by millions. So let's take a listen. Welcome to Richard and Greg. The date is Monday, the 23rd of March, 2020, and the time, 21:56 GMT. At 20:30 hours, 8:30, this evening, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson made an announcement to the people of the United Kingdom, an announcement which no doubt will shock many, and one which we shall discuss with controversially, Greg, as it will have ramifications for every person living in Great Britain today. Greg, good evening.
Good evening.
Tell us what has happened.
Well, I will tell it from my perspective initially, because I expect within the next 24 hours or so to receive a letter from the government to inform me that I fall into a high risk category, in that A, I am over 70, B, I have a heart condition, C, I have had multiple cancer and chemotherapy and radiotherapy, and that I am kept alive not just by my wife but also by my drugs. So tonight Boris Johnson announced that because people were not taking the risks of COVID-19 seriously enough, he intended to introduce, well, I say intended, he was introducing lockdown in many areas on a forcible basis, for which the police would be able to make arrests and fines would be levied if people were in breach of it. Included in that is that all non-essential shops are to close, which is effectively all shops except food and pharmacy. There will possibly be other minor exceptions. That other point that has been made is that you may only go out once a day for exercise, be that running, walking, cycling, or the like, and that you may not do it with any other party other than those who share your household. And you must not come within 2 meters of anyone who is also out on legitimate grounds. This is the initial lockdown, in that the only shopping you may do is essentials, namely food and medicines. The only excuses for going out are essential work, for which you are asked, if possible, to work from home and cut your visits to your workplace to a minimum, and that you are not allowed to gather with anybody else in public or in private. There will be no visiting from house to house, and that only to aid those who are unable to cope for themselves. This is a pretty rigid lockdown. The point being that the government, under Boris Johnson's leadership, has performed, in my opinion, in an exemplary manner from the beginning of this issue. I am heartily sickened by the opposition, who are perpetually harping and saying that he's doing it all wrong. No, there is no doubt that the government we elected as a democracy are acting in our best interest to the best of their ability, which heaven only knows far exceeds anything the opposition has shown any signs of being able to put forward. It is utterly irresponsible of the opposition to endlessly pretend they know how to do it better when they have patently proved, even to their own electorate, that they are inadequate to the job. The only reason that our government is in a position to make the massive commitment of money to assist people that was announced last week is because after 13 unlucky years of misrule that virtually bankrupt the country, the Conservative government has since then functioned on a basis of austerity to desperately rebuild Britain's financial status, which it has managed to do to the extent that our credit is such that we can safely make the commitments as a government that mean that we can pay 80% of people's salary if they lose their job or are forced into a position of not being able to earn during any aspect of this pernicious pandemic, where they are still looking at how they will cope with the unemployed, not the unemployed, the self-employed, that benefits will continue for the unemployed, that there are moves afoot to try to house the homeless in hotels which will no longer be functioning as hotels because people are not on the move or holidaying because of the lockdown, and where people have been encouraged to come back, those who are trained and have in the last year or two left the service of the health service, have been implored to come back to assist in this crisis. The government has also done a deal with all private hospitals to reabsorb the beds into the health services structure and work in cooperation with them. And for transport, well aware that by shutting down so many businesses for the sake of the health of the individuals in the country, there is every possibility that we will effectively be in a position where we would bankrupt every train franchisee and every public transport franchisee. So the government will effectively be putting those services into private ownership to save the franchisees from the debts and costs that will be incurred running the service with a hugely reduced number of clients. Every step of the way has been made to effectively kick the can down the road, whereby obviously no health service in the world would be in a position to immediately meet the peak demands that can be foreseen from a global pandemic. We are prepared, but in a skeletal basis, because one never can tell what nature such a pandemic will be. Neither can one tell when it will happen. The last such pandemic was Spanish flu in the years 1917, 18, and 19, which killed between 50 and 100 million people worldwide. There was no way to prepare for a pandemic, in that one has no idea whether it is going to be a respiratory pandemic or a cholera type pandemic or something like yellow fever, smallpox, malaria, or any variant or combination thereof. It is absolutely specious to say that they should have had more ventilators. What? Gathering dust for 100 years, and then we find that it is a digestive tract problem that doesn't need ventilators. Quite crass of the opposition to start making these claims. They have done brilliantly in that we had 5,000 ventilators in position already in the short period in which the government has kicked the can down the road to push the peak of this disease further away. They have built this up to, I believe it's somewhere like 15,000, and this is still woefully inadequate, but hopefully the peak of this pandemic is further away still, and we will be able to have in place nearer 30,000, if not more, ventilators as required by severe cases of COVID-19 and the other forms of coronavirus that have been seen to date. Bear in mind that coronavirus is nothing like flu, although every half-baked commentator there is saying it's like flu, and they're cross-comparing it. This is a disease that could, if mismanaged, lead to well over 2 million people dying in Great Britain alone. However, under its present management by our present government, who seem to have got everything right so far and show every sign that they will manage it with a steady hand and no hysteria, and have to date avoided any degree of politicking, regardless of what is being thrown at them by the rejected opposition. There is every hope that they will be able to bring this disease under some sort of control way within that figure, though there is no guarantee one way or the other. I hope this helps clarify it a little for you, Richard.
Well, it does, Greg. I was going to ask you 3 questions, but since that took 20 minutes, I'm going to ask you just 2. In view of what you've just said about the extent to which this can actually spread, you may not actually be aware that published today, or yesterday actually, in the Epoch Times, a headline, and maybe you can decipher this. The number of Chinese cell phone users dropped by 21 million in the past 3 months. Beijing authorities announced on the 19th of March. Deaths due to the CCP virus may have contributed to the high number of account closings. Now, Greg, you've got the figures. How many people were reported dead in China as a result of the virus?
Well, the world total to date is 16,319 reported dead. However, I have, in almost every podcast we have done to date, said I do not believe for one moment the Chinese figures.
21 million cell phone users dropped in 3 months.
I can well imagine that this represents the number of people in China who have actually died. I am not for a second saying this is the case. However, one never hears of the 30 to 50 million Chinese who died as a result of the actions of Mao Zedong, nor does one ever hear, and nor do the Chinese even admit, to somewhere we believe to be over 2 million Uyghur Chinese who are in prison camps, euphemistically being re-educated for the temerity of holding to a different superstition, namely Islam, versus the various superstitions of China.
I don't want to go into religion, but this is not the purpose of this podcast. What the purpose is, I wanted you to comment on 21 million. You agree it could be, it's potentially the result of people dying. It's not the result of cancellations. Let me read this to you. The Chinese regime requires all Chinese to use their cell phones to generate a health code. only when a green health code exists are Chinese allowed to move in China now. It's therefore impossible for a person to cancel his cell phone unless he does not wish to move in China. Now, what does happen in China is that you do have multiple phone ownerships. Quite a few Chinese have 2 phones. But even if we said that of those 21 million, that only represents 10 million Chinese, why would they all cancel? Now, 21 million, interestingly, Greg, is approximately 1.5% of the Chinese population. And when we look at the deaths that have occurred, that would suggest, if we were to say, let us assume, we're only making an assumption, that 21 million people have actually died, just an assumption, that's 1.5% of the population. In this country, we have, is it 67 million people? 1.5% would be 1 million people. In America, 360 million, say, times 1.5%, well, 6 times our figure, could be 6 million people. Frightening statistics, no?
Indeed. My sole reason for picking up on religion was to show that you cannot trust any figure that comes out of China.
Indeed.
Namely, the 30 to 50 million who were killed by Mao Zedong's actions, or the 2 million who are currently being re-educated. Neither figure does China admit to.
Interestingly, Greg, just to let you know, that today, gold, because you know I'm of the superficial opinion that the gold markets gives us an idea of how desperate things are becoming. Gold today has actually risen, let's have a little look, by in excess of $53 or £60. Now, that might not sound like a huge sum, but if you bear in mind that it's been languishing for a number of days or almost a week, and all of us, or falling previously, now all of a sudden it started to rise. And what was interesting, and this is the irony of the situation, this morning, and most listeners, when we go over to the Illuminati Silver channel, won't believe me, but this morning I actually bought gold below spot price. I came home and within 2 hours, I was making quite a reasonable profit percentage-wise on the gold, only to find that, let us suppose, just suppose, gold doubled now by tomorrow morning, which none of us believe it will, but let's suppose it does. Because I'm not allowed out, other than for food shopping, I cannot sell it, Greg. Because
you can online.
But how do I deliver it?
I would imagine that it would be legal to send material through the post, which is bound to be still functioning for a business purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe you would be in the clear on that, just as they will be in the clear to go through your records and decide exactly how much gold and silver you have bought and sold and tax you on it.
Well,
so it's a double-edged sword.
Well, there's another problem. We're also told we must not be within 6 feet of another individual. Have you seen the size of the post offices where you would actually dispatch these parcels to? Some of them are no more than 30 feet long.
May I suggest that if it is too great a dilemma for you, you may approach me to within 6 feet and throw any gold and silver that you have in my direction.
Well, I just thought it ironic. I actually managed to acquire gold from a shop which after today will now be closed, only to find that even if I make a huge profit, it's going to take me a while to sell it.
By which time it'll have fallen.
It will have fallen. That's right. It's what's called a Pyrrhic victory.
Talking of Pyrrhic victories, how did you get on with your silver delivery?
Well, I have contacted the company and they are letting me know because they are American based, Greg.
Yeah.
It's supposed to go out on Thursday. I've sent them an email because I haven't been able to get through by telephone. I'm waiting a response. So I will know tomorrow for sure because it's now 10:20 here in the United Kingdom.
Well, I am aware that the company you've been dealing with has been very reputable in all their actions.
Oh, absolutely.
As was the company beforehand, which, rather than accept your money, admitted that they were in a parlous condition and they declined to accept your money to mint the rounds that you were having done.
But it just delayed everything by 2 months, unfortunately. That was the
well, at least 2 months, as I recall. But what of the flatware you bought?
Well, I purchased flatware. Was it on Friday, I think? Flatware silver. And that was on eBay. It was acquired again below spot price, although I did make a very minor error. I didn't take into account.
You made a bloody massive error.
It was a minor error, Greg. But even though I made an error by not taking into account that handles on knives are weighted, note that, everyone, if you buy flatware, don't just take the weight and think, I know the blades won't be silver. Do not forget handles are often weighted on knives. So whereas I hadn't made quite the profit I thought I was going to make, I've still managed to get it below, not below, at spot price.
And what is the spot price for filler in knives?
No, I've had to deduct the filler element. Whereas I thought I had the bargain of the century, I ended up with a good deal, but not the bargain of the century. Greg, on that note, thank you for reminding me of my flaws, and let's speak again soon.
Well, I couldn't let you get away purely with saying how well you'd done on gold.
I shall speak to you shortly.
Indeed, I look forward to it.
Bye-bye. We hope you enjoyed that discussion, and if so, kindly subscribe to our channel and press the bell sign so that you are notified of our videos as and when they are published. And also in the description box below, we place links to certain books, articles, and programs which you may find of benefit, and for which we will receive a small commission should you purchase through our link. And this will help support our channel and to enable us to develop it further.